Is MJF really going to be a free agent in 2024? Guys, I'm convinced that that's not really going to be the case, but nonetheless, I wanted to make this video and tell you guys why I think MJF should sign with WWE in 2024 if he is in fact actually going to be a real free agent. Now, with that being said, I want to make it very clear I'm very happy with MJF in AEW, and I don't think he necessarily has to leave AEW. In fact, there's actually a lot of pros that I have in regards to MJF staying with AEW. So let me just get that out of the way right now. First of all, in AEW, MJF, he's going to get paid great money, right? We know Tony Khan and his father have a big checkbook. They can do a lot. The second thing is AEW has a lighter schedule, right? I think it's pretty known that AEW obviously has their talent work a lot less than WWE, which is good for your body. Obviously, that's a big pro. It's one of the big reasons why people actually leave WWE to go to AEW. You have to keep in mind, MJF is also a top guy in the company. And if, Warner Bros., WBD ends up keeping their TV rights with AEW and they continue to build upon this strong relationship, then it is very clear that being a top guy in this company, he's able to carry the flag for AEW, right? This is the second biggest company in North America. In the US, they are a challenging brand to WWE. There is a lot of upside for him to be the guy in AEW, which is a really good thing, right? It makes a lot of sense. Also, I think a lot of people aren't talking about this, but there's still a lot of matches and, storylines that they can do with MJF. There's a lot of potential matchups that they can do with MJF and AEW. So in regards to that aspect, I feel like he hasn't even hit his ceiling in pro wrestling, let alone in AEW. But obviously, with that being said, there's a lot of pros to MJF staying with AEW. But what about WWE? Well, first you need to acknowledge the fact that him jumping to WWE immediately is a huge risk with a huge reward. MJF can jump into the WWE and potentially become a top guy. I think it's inevitable at this point that he would be a massive free agent signing for WWE. I think WWE definitely doesn't have a hole in their product where they need to fill that hole. I don't see a problem that they have that needs to be resolved. So MJF going in there doesn't necessarily, resolve any problems for the company, but he's still a huge get, and you would be absolutely stupid for thinking that he's not. Obviously, WWE is also going to have great money, right? WWE financially is killing it. WWE as a product is very hot. There's a reason why they're the number one wrestling company. There is a reason why the merger with UFC has so many possible benefits, especially from a financial perspective. There's great money in WWE. But yeah, he can inevitably be the number one guy in the company, which is the number one wrestling company in the world. Obviously, being that number one guy, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Roman Reigns aspect. Eventually, as being the number one guy, you could eventually get that lighter schedule. You could eventually have crossover into Hollywood. You can eventually, you could eventually get the Brock Lesnar, Roman Reigns, The Rock, John Cena treatment, where eventually you could just be a part-timer. If that's something that he ever wants to do later on in his career, that is something that WWE obviously could offer. I also like to think that WWE could potentially give him a little bit more crossover into the mainstream / Hollywood if he wants to do acting and stuff like that, if he really wants to go beyond wrestling. I think every free agent should be thinking about life beyond wrestling. WWE has NXT. WWE has these relationships with other film studios. WWE just being the number one company in general in itself, let alone if you're the top guy in the company, it does open the door for new opportunities outside of wrestling. We have seen that time and time again with other performers. I also think there's a lot of fresh matchups and storylines that they can do with MJF going into WWE. I think you can also factor in there's a couple cons to joining WWE. And the first one that immediately strikes out to me is that he can't call Triple H a fucking mark, right? He cannot do that on live TV. WWE doesn't have that luxury that AEW has, in the sense that they could just kind of say whatever they want. And obviously, this is one of the pros to AEW with their relationship with Warner Bros. Discovery. You know, they kind of get away with these things, and they're able to do these things. And MJF kind of, in his own way, I feel like he kind of gets allowed to do it more than others in AEW. So that's obviously a con, right? MJF would be a little bit stripped down. I don't think he would be stripped down entirely. I think he'll say a lot of stuff, but I just don't think you'll hear him swearing on TV the same way that you see him in AEW. Obviously, WWE does have a heavier workload, especially if you're the top guy, right? If you look at Cody Rhodes and you kind of seen what he's done as a top guy in the company, his workload is crazy. I mean, this guy is always signing. He's always doing signings, meet and greets. He's always at these house shows, these tours, these loops. It's a busier schedule than AEW. That could be a con. That could be a reason for somebody not to want to go to WWE. But then also one thing that you really got to factor in as well, that would be a con for MJF in WWE. It goes back to what I was saying about huge risk, huge reward. But it really goes in aligned with the risk factor, right? Now, I don't believe that WWE or AEW should just strictly be catering to the IWC, not just for whatever these people on Twitter are tweeting, not for people like me who has multiple YouTube channels where I literally get to talk about this stuff for a living. Because as much as I love wrestling, I understand that the way I see wrestling differs from everybody. It differs from the people that are hardcore fans to the people that are casuals, however you want to define casual, that's up to you. But I feel like I see it differently than most people. I do not expect WWE and AEW to write their shows specifically for me, right? But I do think if MJF were to leave AEW, go to WWE, I think if WWE were to fumble him, they change a lot about him. The music and the presentation and they boggle down his promos and stuff like that. I think he is opening the door for a lot of criticism, because the biggest what if in pro wrestling is Undertaker and Sting. It's one of the biggest what ifs. What would happen if they wrestled in their prime? But aside from a good entrance, I don't know if that match would be something I would desire. I think those entrances and video packages and promos and stuff would have been amazing. But the match itself, I'm not sure if that's the case. So yes, there is huge risk with this scenario, but if you were to go to WWE and WWE doesn't deliver for MJF, people are always going to look at him as a failure. Now, it's unfortunate that people would look at MJF as a failure because it's not MJF's fault. That's just part of the risk of joining WWE. But that would obviously follow him for a while, right? That would kind of be a stain on his record, for going to WWE and then them dropping the ball. I think a lot of people say MJF can't be successful in WWE. I think that's disrespectful to MJF because I think he's talented. He can go anywhere and be successful. I think the biggest thing is I want to see him in WWE just from a fan's perspective. There's a lot of matchups and stories that I would love to see, and I would love to see what WWE can do with MJF. The part of me that doesn't like MJF going to WWE is the aspect in the sense of overall wrestling industry health. MJF is clearly the number one guy in AEW. I don't think that's really debatable. Because he's the number one guy in AEW, him leaving AEW really impacts AEW. If MJF were to go to WWE, I'm going to be okay with that as long as I know that other top stars in WWE have left for AEW, if that makes sense. So like if Drew McIntyre left WWE for AEW, whoever else becomes a free agent, that sort of thing. But it's an interesting topic, man. I think a lot of people love MJF, and I think regardless, as a fan of MJF, I'm pretty much happy with him wherever he goes. I remember watching him in MLW, and I always said, man, this guy would be great in WWE. He didn't go to WWE. He went to AEW, and he's been incredible in AEW. So I'm okay with him staying in AEW. But there is definitely a big part of me that would just like to see what modern day WWE would do when a top free agent becomes available. WWE has made it very clear, with Cody, Jade, and now even Brian Pillman Jr. They're trying to take AEW talent and do something special with them. And I think WWE would do the same thing with MJF, but it's still a risk. It's still a risk. I think he should go to WWE. I would like to see him in WWE, but I have no problem with him in AEW. I think that's pretty clear. What do you guys think?